So we are going to hear from the rapporteurs for the 5 sessions. Mary's doing double duty, so that's why we only have 4 people here. And I will just mention the session name, and then I'll ask the rapporteur to introduce themselves, and then everybody's got up to 5 minutes. So we're going to, I know it'll be tough because there were rich discussions, but up to 5 minutes to provide highlights from the session for which you were the rapporteur. So if we could begin with the lived experience session.
Hello, I'm Bill Adair. I'm the Executive Director of Spinal Cord Injury Canada and lead the Canadian Accessibility Alliance. Sorry, I'm frozen there. So we in our panel, we were hearing insights from people with lived experience. So I'm going to start with some of the comments that were made relating experiences, and really they turned into fuel for action. Then I'm going to go over 8 light bulb ideas that the light came on, and our recommendations to help guide the changes to the draft document that we're all working on together. So first, many people were talking about, you know, we have the knowledge and skills to contribute and to be successful, but we feel like we're invisible. Nobody else can see that. We are blocked from contributing in the workplace due to stigma and stereotypes of the ideal worker being able, well, strong, robust. We face enormous discrimination due to attitudes and inability of others to see our gifts. And then each person talked about their strength being their disability, and it being a well of knowledge, a font of knowledge and understanding that can be used to excel in performing on the job. One of our speakers talked about, I went to university, got 2 master's degrees, looked for a job for 2 years, and it was no, 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 no. Well, finally, he was discovered and landed a job, and then was discovered by another company that came along and lured him away, kind of like a hockey player being stolen from a team. People talked about realizing that they themselves need to be a trailblazer, an advocate for their own abilities, and eventually this was seen by others. So what are the lessons that we learned and the lessons that were brought out in our panel? The first one is build innovation into the plan. Rethink, reframe, and adjust how a person with a disability is viewed. Disability is seen as an asset, and to achieve a time when disability is seen as an asset and is a preferred skill. So when an employee is being selected, it becomes an advantage for the person with a disability. French language is preferred. Well, why not disability? Second one is engage civil society. So not-for-profit organizations should be participating actively in writing the plan, and they are, and also implementation, and they will be. Very similar to lessons that we learned from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, where civil society was very actively involved, and also brings into play the announcement by Minister Quattro yesterday that Canada has acceded to the optional protocol, which I think probably most people have heard, but that was largely due to civil society lobbying and directing that work. Third light bulb, educate, inform, and prepare people with disabilities. Good and valued workers are people that are resilient, aware of their rights, able to access supports and training, and are welcomed on the job. Number 4, drive attitude change through individual workers developing a sense of self-pride and confidence and ability to advocate for their own rights. And secondly, collaborating, creating a platform for collaboration among organizations of people with disabilities, so they can work together to speak with one voice and to act in a unified direction. We talked about a metaphor on this one, imagining a boat, and the boat has the right people on board, and it is an inclusive group of not-for-profit organizations, and they're rowing in the same direction. So we had at least 2 Newfoundlanders in our group, so that helped us with that metaphor. Number 5, light bulb number 5, look ahead. Let's look to the kids who will be the change in the future. Let's look at kids in high school and post-secondary students who are thinking differently about making changes. Let's look for entrepreneurs and youth innovators who take a fresh new approach to changing society. One of the things that was mentioned is an organization called Stopgap, where a person who uses a wheelchair started building simple plywood ramps that would go into establishments, commercial organizations to provide access. And it started changing attitudes along with just a simple ramp. Number 6, don't do timid. When we're looking at our plan, let's create a bold, audacious plan to drive change. And let's be standing up for the rights of people with disabilities, and let's be supporting the employers with taking bold steps to involve people with disabilities on the job. So we had, of course, research participation from our researcher, and two light bulbs here. The number 1 is to use and apply the body of knowledge in developing the plan. What is it that supports success and excellence in performance for employees with disabilities? Let's build on that and apply it throughout the plan. And number 8, impact, of course, a big one, being one of the major areas of the plan. Let's measure progress, let's measure outcomes, benefits to employers, benefits to employees, benefits to society, and look at strategies for improving the plan over time. Thanks to our panel members and to the full participation of the group who asked questions.
And we're going to turn next then to Mary Reed, who's reporting on highlights from the service providers session. Mary.
The panels were a diverse group, for sure, of service providers, and included service providers in areas of supporting individuals with intellectual disabilities, supporting individuals with episodic disabilities, providing employer supports, working with individuals with mental illness, groups that focus on training and placing. They wore hats that included working with employers to change policy and practice and governments, LGBTQ, two-spirited, and community. So there was a real diversity of knowledge and expertise within this panel. So the questions that the panel were posed with was, number 1, what role can service providers provide or play within the strategy? And really their answers were very clear and numerous, and I'm sure would have been, could have gone on for a couple of hours. But some of the ones that they identified was to address an employer's cautions or perhaps fear, particularly around areas of accommodations, by giving them practical advice, providing them with tools. Also to share stories about businesses that have experienced the benefits of a workplace that's become more diverse and inclusive. And this was really suggested as a reframing of how the business case is in the draft strategy now. So rather than focusing on a business case that held individual employees up as being super duper, it would really look at the benefits of the workplace being more diverse, the whole benefits to all employees. Service providers saw themselves as having a role with building disability confidence for the workplace and providing employee training. They provided stories of individuals who had been provided with adjustments with the help of service providers, but actually those adjustments helped the whole workforce, and other folks were using them as well. Promoting the idea that when business invests in people, everybody benefits, bridging the gaps when there's a huge shift in the labor market and a huge change, such as what's happening now with the GM closure in Oshawa. identifying employment deterrents to support providers, such as those within government and government funders. So letting them know what the deterrents are within the programs, so to assist them with solving that. Having the ability to tailor supports to both stakeholders, tailoring supports to the individual and to the individual employer. Checking with the signer, am I speaking to? Okay, thank you. One panelist said really it's the current role that they have now, which they call a 4x4 role. It includes research, education, policy change, practice change. They have a more significant role now than before, primarily because the workforce, the labor force is changing. And it's becoming much more difficult. It's not long-term careers anymore, it's short-term contracts. And they can also have a role in identifying why previous strategies, and we've had many in the past 25 years, that have failed and why they've failed, and to avoid the risk of failing forward. They saw themselves as being able to bring together an intentional network, a community of practice, being able to use that network to share information amongst service providers. Holy cow, 2 minutes. I'm on question 1. Bless it. Okay, so their most important priorities were in relation to employment of persons with disabilities, was to include have a solid workplace policy and workplace accommodation, and help employers change their behavior, to use existing tools that are already out there. One that came to mind was something in Calgary, in terms of Calgary Ability Works. A successful initiative was seen as working together between federal government and it was Live, Work, Play, where there's 63 individuals with intellectual disabilities now employed. They saw that as very important. The priority needs of this group were clear. They need supports, these are service providers, need supports, data, increased and insecure funding. They were glad to see episodic mentioned in the strategy, and they would like to focus more on that. How can research support the goals? Well, really, it's support the earlier recommendation for including disability type in the data that's collected, to track the investments, and these are investments through different perspectives, one being a perspective of supported employment where the support is no longer required, and what does that investment look like in terms of cost savings down the road. The biggest problem that they saw is in terms of employers, are often those employers that have a diversity plan. And I think that's something important, and we need to remember. Sometimes a diversity plan, a diversity officer is a gatekeeper, and particularly a large corporation can do the check-off. They found small and medium employers, enterprises, as being more open because they're just looking for a worker. It's not part of a plan to be more diverse. And they really want to change their brand. They're seen as being you people helping those people, and that's not what it's about. They also want to have service standards amongst their organizations to block other organizations and the competitiveness of funding, so that groups aren't pulling in just to get the money and say that they're providing employment supports. I apologize to my panel. There was so much more there. It was a very rich discussion, but you'll see it in the final report.
Thank you, Mary, and again, thanks to the participants in that session. Okay, so we're going to hear next from Nina Hansen, who was the rapporteur for the session on unions.
Earlier today, someone said that we need to come at this strategy from our shared values, and that's something that the labor movement agrees with. In BC, we sum up our values with a Wordsworth quote: "What we desire for ourselves, we desire for all." And certainly from everything I've heard today, I think that's a shared value in this room. I think the panel clearly established that unions play an important role as a partner and as an ally in this national strategy, standing in solidarity with persons with disability. As a movement, we strive to be a voice for all workers, not just unionized workers, promoting the rights of workers to healthy, safe, inclusive and family-sustaining work and workplaces. We have unique access to workers, as one of the panelists pointed out today, and to workplaces, as well as to community and social partnerships that we've worked really hard to develop relations with over time. Collectively, unions have power and privilege, and we wish to use this to improve the work and the lives of all Canadians. So how do we do this? First, the labor movement across Canada works with all levels of government, as well as other regulatory bodies, to lobby for public policy changes to promote more inclusive work and environments and the necessary supports to eliminate poverty in Canada. And as Elizabeth Kwan pointed out on the employers panel, making sure that legislative policy and practice changes do not create new unintended barriers for persons with disabilities or other equity-seeking groups, as we tend to do, layer on these barriers. We also take very seriously our role in holding governments accountable when they either do not make change or don't meaningfully implement the changes that they promise. We also work closely with employers on disability prevention and inclusion, advocating for workplace design and work organization that fits every worker rather than trying to fit the worker to the job. I come from a health and safety background, and so that's like a really simple ergonomic practice that I think works in a lot of different areas. Unions collectively bargain benefits, supports, training and retraining, and other accommodations that support all workers to stay employed, and also work with our employers to advocate for proactive and inclusive hiring practices. We heard today from the panel that in precarious work, such as in the construction industry, all of this is much more challenging. Unions and employers have to become more creative in these industries, have a bit of a can-do attitude to hiring and retaining persons with disabilities. And this is not going to be an easy problem to solve. Unions also work directly with their members, so we provide advice and representation for workers with compensation claims, assist them with their long-term disability claims, and such things, help them where possible in navigating the complex processes that are often in place to access the supports that are available. Many workers that come to our doors don't even often know about the supports that they have accessible to them. So we try to help with that. So what does the research say? Does it all add up? Well, the researcher on our panel today told us that the research supports that unions do play a critical role in the retention of workers with disabilities. The security and protection provided by collective agreements empowered more workers to refuse unsafe work, report injuries and illnesses, file claims, and access accommodations in their workplaces. Many unions work closely with employers to develop formalized joint disability management processes that achieve better return to work outcomes for disabled workers. However, and I just lost my spot, but the picture is not all that rosy. So some of the research also shows that workers are reporting that their unions in some ways actually impeded their successful accommodation or led to more confrontational relationships with their employers. So maybe we don't have it all figured out yet either. This is no surprise to many. Unions still have a long way to go to achieve our desire to be leaders in equity and inclusion, both public-facing and in our own structures and workplaces. We need to work harder to ensure that our constructs, the ones we've developed, such as collective agreements and seniority provisions, constitution and bylaws, don't create artificial barriers for workers with diverse needs. We need to listen and learn from persons with disabilities, be adaptable and open to change, something that's not always easy for the labor movement. We also heard that unions have a responsibility to do more to educate employers and our own members about the rights of persons with disabilities and the duty to accommodate, as well as what a good accommodation looks like, which means not just shifting the burden of that work to another worker, exposing them to a potential work-related disability and to more conflict in the workplace. We need to work harder to create space, to make sure that our leadership starts to reflect the diversity of our membership. And I know I'm out of time. We also need to work harder within our unions as workplaces, because unions are employers as well. to walk the talk by employing equitable and inclusive hiring and retention practices. But as we heard today, the good news is many unions have started this work intentionally, courageously, and humbly, turning a microscope on ourselves and beginning the work necessary to be truly inclusive and equitable. So in summary, labor is a valuable partner and ally. We're ready to do the work with all the stakeholders to support inclusive and equitable workplaces where diversity is not just accommodated, but valued and celebrated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nina. So we're back to Mary. Mary will get multiple thank you cards from the steering committee. So Mary's going to report on the discussion in the session on interface of federal and provincial programs.
Yes, another dynamic discussion, no doubt about it, and a difficult one for sure, and one that often isn't as open and exciting as it was today. So it was really a great discussion. So the question was really talked about the goals of the strategy to improve the interface across programs, and one thing was a common language like disability confident, and interesting enough, they also suggested that common language of disability confident be used to reframe the business case, and that had come up, as you'll recall, within the service provider session as well. Also said that let's not lose sight that the real question here is, will the strategy improve lives? Is it client-centric? Will it address stigma and intersectionality and adequate level of income for people? So while ideally programs have to be complementary, we want them complementary and not at cross purposes, we also want to, need to apply a healthy dose of reality here. That these programs are sometimes enshrined in constitutional agreements and documents and are not going to be fiddled with in the near future. And they're going to stay, some of them, such as income support, the at provincial, federal level, CPP, EI, that is not going to make a shift soon. So let's accept that and work with that and still look for ways to align. One example given of that alignment was using the different criteria of assessment from programs such as CPP, DP into provincial programs. So it's one way of helping it be more navigatable or easier for people to get through. When we look at the values in the strategy, client friendliness, coherent, easy to navigate, the panel was asked how they felt about that and if it aligned at their level, provincial level, federal level. And they felt, yes, those are all dandy, well said, but really hard to measure. So let's frame that in terms of looking at it as outcome, employment participation, satisfaction level by individuals. And that's how we'll get at those other values. The goals of the strategy are certainly key. We ideally would have a one-shop stop. We know at the same time a lot of rural areas was said have a no-stop shop. There's just nothing there, so we have to work around that as well. When we looked at concrete examples of successful initiatives, there wasn't a lot, and it's a hard one to do because it's been very difficult to have coherent programs. One example is a straightforward one of co-location of services, particularly mental health and employment. Another one is kind of the new workforce development agreement, and also seen as a good example. In terms of what we can do now or long-term, some of the things that are easy to do is to provide system navigators who are knowledgeable, and it was suggested that the best folks for this type of a job are people with lived experience. They've been through it. Also being able to look at how our own programs inside a jurisdiction work together, even when there's different ministries. It did come up several times by panelists and people from the floor design and analysis has to engage and have full participation by people with lived experience. Sometimes we make a change in service delivery or services and programs, and we think it's way better, such as e-services, and that's not way better for some people. We can't ditch it because it is better for others, so it's not a one-size-fits-all, and that needs to be remembered. We do want to align criteria of different programs. The researcher, John, on the panel, used the analogy of a house. The bricks are the programs, and the mortar, it really is the people with lived experience to bring it together. I think really want to say, too, that before I run out of time, that our current system has job programs that are really based on a competitive model. We have organizations and different service delivery agencies kind of having to compete for that funding, and it was suggested that we move towards a collaborative model. And this we see happening in other worlds, such as poverty reduction a bit and homelessness strategies. So it's a challenge for the strategy and for all of us to look at it more collaboratively. We did look at consistency of data, and again, stop. Pretty blunt.
Let you finish this.
A little bit hurt. Oh, finish sentence. Thanks. So kind. Again, it was the Workforce Development Agreement that was seen as being something that is going to address this consistency of data, at least in one area. First reporting is 2019, but this was done in a multilateral approach so that provinces, territories, federals agreed on what's being reported on. So we may see a change in that data being more usable and comparable and consistent. End of sentence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, again. Okay, so the last of the parallel sessions was focused on the role of employers, and Megan Kelly of CCRW is going to report back on that for us.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to go last so I could collect my notes as I was at another session. Again, my name is Megan Kelly, and I'm the National Corporate Relations Manager with CCRW. And, you know, when I was taking down the notes for the employer panel, it was a really, really rich discussion, and there was a lot of parallel themes that, you know, the diverse group of all women, I might add, that were at the table brought forward, and really what they need to see as employers in this national strategy, what's going to speak to them. So I'll just give you some of the high-level takeaways from that. And another thing that I've noticed just in listening to you know, the other reports from the sessions is that, again, there's parallel themes among all these sectors and all these representation is that, you know, collaboration and partnership has come up every single time. So that's something that I think we really need to dig into and recognize what that means for all the groups and ensure that it's really represented in this national strategy. And from the employer perspective, it was discussed that, you know, we really need to acknowledge employers and acknowledge where they're coming from, and that, you know, as employers, they are adverse to risk, and that we need to also recognize that we need to demonstrate their bottom line. And it's okay to focus on talking about money, because employers need to make money to stay in business and to keep employing people. The employers are very diverse, and we need to, again, have diverse services and supports that are going to meet the needs of every employer. We talked about the measurement as it was discussed for the national strategy, employers being able to leverage those stats and tap into what that is. And partnerships are key, specifically to access talent. And the collaboration to access that talent is very, very important. And that speaks to the navigability, I was practicing that word, navigability of both the national strategy and the network of systems that exists within it. And how they're, you know, that in order to navigate that system, we need to recognize that there are gaps, and those gaps need to be resolved in order for employers to access the talent, but also to access the support. Disability competence, how do we measure that? what is the gold standard of disability competence? How do we, so we as employers, know what that is? What is the bar? And how is that communicated? Recognizing that there is a fear of the unknown for employers. So how do we reduce that fear? And how do we train against the fear? There was a lot of talk about hiring for careers, not just hiring for jobs. And again, that speaks back to access to talent and partnership and collaboration, and also support. 2 minutes, okay. There was, I believe it was the researcher who talked about job readiness, and that the focus needs to shift from the employment focus of job readiness training to employer focus. So there was a real big push on this. It really needs to speak to employers and include the focus of employment as an integral part of that equation. Because right now the approach can be quite fragmented, and navigating through that can be quite difficult. So again, we answered the question, what do we need to see in the strategy? And one of the sort of statements that was said was, we need to build a bigger tent, and we need to invite more people in it. So that was probably the major takeaway, again, with promoting partnership and collaboration within that tent. And I'm going to finish under time. No stop sign.
Okay, my thanks to all the rapporteurs and to everybody for the participation in that session. We're almost done today, just a few more minutes of your time. There's a couple things I want to go over about this evening and a preview of tomorrow. While I'm doing that, I'm going to ask Alec to come forward, Alec Farquhar from the steering committee, because he's going to, in like a minute, outline one aspect of this evening that we want people to be aware of and think about. So, as Alec's coming up, I just want to, again, remind everybody the reception starts at 6:30, and there'll be finger food. There will be a poutine bar, so there's a big attraction right there. And Minister Hajdu's going to be speaking at 7 o'clock, so good to come early-ish. Ideally right at 6:30, but come early-ish to the reception. Before we come to the icebreaker that Alec's going to talk about, let me just mention that tomorrow there'll be breakfast. There'll be a breakfast out here tomorrow at 8:15, and we start tomorrow at 8:45. The conference resumes at 8:45, and we have a great day, I think, planned tomorrow with sessions in the morning on monitoring and evaluation, on mental health, on small business, and then the afternoon will be focused on you and hearing from you about your ideas about going forward. With that, I'm going to ask Alec to come and then talk about the icebreaker this evening.
I know when people see a reception on an agenda, it's a long day. Imagine everyone's tired. You've made a lot of connections, got a lot on your mind. It's more than a reception, and now it is not meant to be work, but we thought, let's figure out a really simple, accessible way that we could continue the dialogue. And if you want to talk about the topics of the conference, which you don't have to, but if you want to, we're basically going to divide the room into 6 areas. And you'll be guided to those areas. It's the same room. It's just going to be a question of where it is. One for each of the pillars. I think one for sort of a miscellaneous discussion, whatever people want to bring up. And one, I hope I'm not misrepresenting this, is Unifor is sponsoring as a conference sponsor, and it'll be on some of the themes that Nikki was speaking to regarding the community connection, recruitment as a new frontier for union employer collaboration. And I won't steal her thunder, but that's a big issue for them. So it'll be sort of 6 tables. You go to any or all tables as you wish. You can just observe the conversation. There'll be flip charts at each table. We'll gather up all the comments, just like you heard from the rapporteurs today. And it'll just be another chance for more informal input. Also, wear your tag or If you have a visual impairment or for some other reason the tags are not accessible to you, don't be afraid of just going up to somebody, introduce yourself, get to know somebody new. It can be intimidating. You think everyone else knows everyone else, which they don't. And this is your chance. Go up to somebody you've seen speak. Go up to somebody whose ideas you're interested in. Maybe you want to share something. It's really important. And I guess probably don't eat too much poutine. We want you here tomorrow, not sort of recovering from that. But other than that, we're going to have a great time together tonight. And Patty Haidu, Minister of Labor, she is an impressive person, and we're looking forward to hearing from her.
It's here.
Oh, it's right here. Yeah, in this room.
All right, great. See you tonight.